Along with counting heads, the federal census activates the clockwork for political redistricting. 10 years ago, that helped pave the way to the election of the first African-American to represent part of Boston and some other communities in Congress. But other results of that redistricting show there's still a mismatch between the state's population and the racial balance of political power. As part of an effort to address that in the next set of political boundaries, there will be a community hearing tomorrow at 10 a.m. in Roxbury at Malcolm X Park. To tell us about the event is a community and political activist, Dorothea Jones. Thank you very much for being with us, Dorothea.
Thank you for allowing me an opportunity to speak.
One thing I'd like to do to extended introduction is to mention that you go way back with redistricting, even as a member of the Black Political Task Force 20 years ago, challenging a set of district boundaries that were drawn for Massachusetts. What did you learn from that experience?
The thing that I learned that, and it's something that I actually grew up with, is every time you want something, you have to fight for it, especially if you are an African American. That's our history in this country.
Well, part of my own history is thinking of the second Suffolk district, which includes Roxbury, Jamaica Plain, and some other parts of the city, as a Black district. I remember people like Bill Owens being the senator, then Diane Wilkerson, and somehow along the way that changed. And we're at the point right now in Massachusetts, though we do have a person of color in that seat, we have no Black state senators. So how do we account for that?
I think that we account for that quite possibly by the people that decide to run for office, the way that the lines have been drawn, because as you know, the district that is currently Sonia Chang Diaz's has moved from Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan into Jamaica Plain, where there were more votes that were coming from that area in particular, and perhaps based on numbers, not enough people of color. So Sonia Chang Diaz, while considered a person of color, certainly represented the district that was more from Jamaica Plain than from Roxbury. That's my opinion.
Well, the original, I wouldn't say necessarily original, but the earlier footprint with senators like Bill Owens was changed. As you indicated, there were more white voters, maybe very progressive white voters, but no, they are white. They were put into the mix, and that played a role in what we have right now. But what about the ideas for the future? I mean, redistricting, one thing that people should be able to ask for is a community of interest, whether that's by race or some other factor. What about exploring that tomorrow in the hearing?
I think determining a community of interest is always important. I think that if you look at the way that historically Latinos have been treated and their background and their culture, the background and culture of African Americans, and to some degree, even the background and culture of Asian Americans may be much more aligned with each other than it is with the majority population in Massachusetts.
Well, one idea for this is to change the boundaries of this district, so there's maybe less of maybe the south end of Jamaica Plain and the Fenway, maybe, and maybe more of areas in Dorchester, in Mattapan. Is that something you expect to hear from tomorrow?
I don't know what we're going to hear tomorrow, because we are hoping to have a number of speakers, and it's very difficult to say how someone else feels. I know that there has been a lot of outreach, and there is a lot of encouragement for people from all walks of life, all races, to come and express their opinions about adding more districts of color and districts that are closely aligned, our community of interest.
I want to ask you about how the population is reflected in a given district, because when you look at figures like Sonia Chang Diaz and even Mike Capuano before, when he was Ayanna Pressley's predecessor, people would classify them as progressive, or at least fairly progressive. But on the other hand, it makes a difference, doesn't it, who actually gets to be the person representing that district? I mean, the difference between Capuano and his successor, Ayanna Pressley. So shouldn't people be thinking of that as well?
You know, I think that that is one of the things that drives us all to the polls. And I think we can see that very clearly nationally as of last year, when people knew that they had to get rid of the renegade president, Donald Trump, and to elect somebody that was more substantive to the issues that they strongly believed in. I think that we're just going to wait and see what happens. But I think that a community of interest goes across ethnicities and racial lines sometimes. And I think that the difference between Capuano and Ayanna Pressley, although she was from the Midwest, she grew up in the Midwest, certainly her life experience was much more aligned with Black Americans in Massachusetts than unfortunately, Capuano's was.
Well, I think for a lot of us, Presley sort of overshadowed the factor of the district boundaries themselves as a way to take office there. But at the same time, populations are changing. In the neighboring district that's represented by Steve Lynch, there are too many people right now, so some of them have to be put into another district. Is there any reason to be concerned about keeping the kind of balance that we had currently in Presley's district?
I attended one of the joint redistricting committee hearings, and I know that many people, even as far as Randolph, who have Congresswoman Presley as on the fact that they can relate to her, she relates to them. There's an understanding, and they want to make sure that Congresswoman Presley continues to be their congressperson. Now, I know that in Revere, where I saw on the news this morning that Revere, the population has changed pretty significantly. If it's, I think it was 20%. And I'm sure that that population is a Latino population. And I think there's room for African Americans as well as possible Latino driven Congress person coming from that area. So I think the way that it's divided and the way that we, the expectation, we have to fight for our expectation. And when we had the hearing, when there was the joint redistricting committee hearing, we were told that Senator Brownsberger and Representative Moran were going to do everything to make sure that their decisions were equitable. And that's what we are going to hold them to.
If you look at the current legislative delegation from Boston in the State House, you will still see there's a lag between who the incumbents are and the mix of the population, the electorate. It looks as if Boston could be getting another House district. Do you see an opportunity there for closing the gap in the balance of power?
I see the possibility as long as people register and go out and vote, because if we look to the American ideal of one person, one vote, if we look to that in the drawing of the lines as well as the electorate getting out and voting, we will get those things that we deserve within our elected or political life.
All right, I want to ask you about the community hearing tomorrow, because I think there are a lot of people who might be on the same wavelength, but maybe they're not quite sure about how to take the next step. Why is it important for people to take part in this hearing tomorrow?
It's always important for people to become politically activated. I think that especially for Black Americans, had it not been for our activation, we may not have even served in World War I or World War II. We would not have accomplished the civil rights legislation that came to pass. And now, because of the renegades and their decisions to try to push everything back that we have achieved, we know even more importantly, it is necessary and required for us to continue to push voter registration, voter education, and voter involvement.
And finally, Dorothea, as far as the time and place of this hearing tomorrow?
The location is at Malcolm X Park. It is on Martin Luther King Boulevard. It is at 10 o'clock. We expect to have a fair number of people that will respond to our call to come out and testify, either written, sending it in written, or in person, giving in-person testimony.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
Okay, thank you so much for giving us that opportunity.
As political and community activist Dorothea Jones. We'll have more news in just a moment.